Okay, I just had a new controller prototype I just got working. I wanted to show you. Um, this is the big stick. The reason I wanted to, there's actually two reasons I wanted to show you this. Um, the first is it's a good example of another controller you could make using our kit parts, which is how I made this. And it'll be, in this specific one, will be one of the kits we'll have. But really, the whole point there is that with our small basic electronic kits, um, and the foot miscellaneous controller, instrument controller. With those two things, you can basically make any device you can think of that can involve some physical motion a musical instrument. And that was really the original point of this whole system, was that provide a way for people to be able to say, okay, I have this very unique situation, and I can move in these very unique ways, and I can use those ways to make music. So that was really the whole point of what was the starting point. So what the controller does for you is it takes the resistance and voltage and whatnot from whatever you've made, in this case the big stick, and it converts it to control voltages, and then it gives you a way to tune it so that you're not just playing some random pitch, and then it provides a way to quantize it so that you're playing the right notes. And that's really the key, I think, to the system, is so many of the controllers are in some ways limited to how well they could normally control pitch, but by quantizing and doing pitch correction and whatnot, that really kind of makes a big difference. And then converting it to MIDI, and that's where you can either control a MIDI instrument or an analog synth directly, or both at the same time, actually. So in any event, all of the custom controllers work the way I just described. Now this happens to be the big stick. The other thing it's a good example of, that was the first thing, is it's a good example of using the electronic kit parts to build one of your own controllers. It's also a good example of a coarse motion controller. We have a couple other controllers right now. There's the nunchuck controller, and then the small metal box controller. And those are examples of minimal motion controllers. You don't have to move very much to use them, almost none at all really, but you do have to move fairly precisely, or it's almost impossible to play the exact notes you want to play. This is almost at the opposite end of the spectrum. This one you have to move a fair amount, you know, maybe up to a foot worth of movement, maybe. But the trade-off is you don't have to be near as exact. So even though you got to move more, you don't really have to be nearly as precise. So I'm calling these coarse motion controllers, whereas the other ones are minimal motion controllers. Okay. So this here is with about 5 minutes of practice, and then I just spent 10 minutes yabbering. So. There's some mistakes there, but it's extremely playable considering I just got it working, and yeah. So this is another thing, you know. So I think this could in itself be a really useful controller for certain people. But in any event, I'd like you to also just consider it's another example of building a controller, perhaps one you even design yourself. The generalized way all of our controllers work is pretty well demonstrated just by our first two here. This is kind of my very first one, the aptly named small metal box, and then this is one I just got done, the big stick. But just like any of our physical motion controllers built from kits, including hopefully the ones you'll be designing and building yourselves for unique situations, they really are all going to work the whole same, which was the whole point of the original design, was to, even though parts of the design in the system are somewhat complicated, the controllers that you can design and build yourselves to work with it, on the other hand, are very, very simple. Because the whole point was to transfer all the complexity to the controllers and also the synthesizers themselves, and then make it so that as you might need to design and build your own controller, they're simple. That was kind of the point. So basically, to build a controller that works with our foot and miscellaneous instrument controller, which is one of the things you need, it also works with all the analog synths, and it will work with many of the other controllers, or can be added to all of them. But in any event, the main thing that I use it with is the foot or miscellaneous instrument controller, which can be used to play both a MIDI instrument or keyboard, as well as drive an analog synth, and both at the same time. They all work exactly the same way. There's a switch here on the small metal box, or in the case of the big stick, it's here, and that's what strikes the note or triggers the note. And there's a whole long story behind this that I'll skip, but the gist of it is these are normally closed momentary switches. Normally closed, not normally open. Within musical devices and equipment and whatnot, they're both frequently used. To make a long story short, I just felt that when I was doing the experiments with the normally closed and normally opened, I got a fewer number of false note triggers and stuck MIDI notes. So that's one of the main reasons. So the whole system generally favors normally closed switches. So one part of it's a switch to strike or trigger the note. So whatever you might design and build from one of our kits, one of the parts of the controller, the physical control you have to have in there, is some way to hit the switch. The second part is a potentiometer. And on the small metal box it's here, and on the big stick it's moving the stick. In fact, you should be able to see that, moving the notes on the quantizer there. And so that's basically a potentiometer. And the potentiometer can be rotational, as these two are, or it can be linear. And you can get a short throw linear or a longer throw linear. So the point there is, between having some way to trigger a switch and some way to have something either rotational or linear transfer a motion, with those two combinations you can play music and jam. So that's kind of the main point of those parts of the system, and I just wanted to show these are two examples, and hopefully as time goes on people will come up with creative new ways to solve very unique situations for people, and those will produce new controllers. So that's how that all works.